afternoon. Welcome to the Atlantic Council and welcome to this afternoon's session on Putin's propaganda, pushing back against Kremlin-run television. My name is Lauren Van Meter and I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. I will be moderating today's event. Before we go any further, the event is being tweeted at Russia Factor, hashtag Russia Factor, and we welcome all of you to join in the conversation via Twitter. I'd like to make introductions to our panel. Randy Sellier. Randy is a lawyer with Rottenberg, Lippman, Rich in New York City, where he specializes in a wide range of litigations, but most importantly for this case, in professional liability cases, and Randy, often cases that cross international borders. Marina Litvinenko is president and founder of the Litvinenko Justice Foundation. She and Alex together have co-authored a book, Death of a Dissident, The Poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko and the Return of the KGB. Marina is a tireless advocate through interviews and press appearances. Her advocacy for accountability in her husband's case is extended to all Russian dissidents affected by Moscow's aggressions. Alex Goldfarb is by training and profession a microbiologist. Alex, in looking through your bio, you have been at the forefront of major movements for transparency and justice in human rights, documenting and disseminating information on human rights violations in Chechnya, helping to bring to light the Kuchma tapes in Ukraine, and supporting the Committee of Soldier Mothers and other NGOs seeking human rights protections in Russia. I would also mention that Alex, with Marina, is leads the Litvinenko Justice Foundation. The way we're going to run the session this afternoon, with these brief introductions, I'm going to allow each of the panelists to speak for 5 minutes. I believe we also have a video.
Yeah, sure.
A short video. We will then have a panel discussion for 40 minutes, and then I will open up to audience questions. Shall we start with the video?
Well, I just want to make a short introduction. This video are small clips out of 5 prime times programs on Russian television, Channel 1 Russia and Russia Today, which are the subject of my defamation lawsuit against these 2 channels, which has been filed with Randy's help last week in New York in a federal court. And as you will see, these programs accused me of being a CIA agent who has murdered my friend Sasha Litvinenko, Marina's husband, in 2006 with radioactive polonium, because I wanted to, the CIA wanted to tarnish Russia. All of this was broadcast recently in the context of Russian propaganda damage control after the attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury. And the aim of it is, of course, to distance Russian government by saying that both poisonings had nothing to do with Russia. So you would see that the main person who is accusing me of these crimes is Alexander Litvinenko's father, Marina's father-in-law, who had his own story of being first very critical of Putin in this case, and then changing his tune completely, and started working with Russian propaganda against his own late son. So without further ado, I think we'll go to this video.
И отец Александра приехали к нам на программу. Встречаем. Добрый вечер. Ну, тут интересные детали. Как Валерий Александрович и Максим здороваются с Андреем Луговым. Как это вы так вот с отравителем, если верить британским спецслужбам?
С убийцей.
So this is clip number 1.
А там Гольфарба жена сидит молоденькая девочка на кровати сидит, рыдает, плачет. Волтер, Волтер, Алекс килл Александр. Кто по-английски понимает, тот знает, что я сказал. Алекс — это Гольфар. Она прямо в открытую мне сказала, что Гольфарб убил...
Это была жена Гольфарба?
А жена Гольфарба. Через месяц ее не стало.
Она призналась, что муж убил Александра, и через месяц сама умерла в 28 лет.
You mean
Goldfarb's
wife? She had cancer
Да никакого ракового заболевания.
No, she didn't have cancer.
Они ее...
It's a young woman. They just killed her because she knew too much and she spoke too much.
За спиной.
Итак, версия отца Литвиненко. Александра отравили ЦРУ совместно с Ми-5 и Ми-6, дабы дискредитировать Россию. Сделано это было руками Александра Гольдфарба. Полоний он ему подсыпал уже в больнице. Что касается Лугового, то его инфицировали в незначительных дозах уже позже, для того, чтобы он мог наследить полонием в разных местах.
So that's it. So the narrative, as you see, is that I've killed Sasha Litvinenko and then my own wife because she knew too much and spoke too much. And then I arranged to plant polonium on Andrei Lugovoy, and that's why he got involved. In a nutshell, that's the essence of our claim, and we have done it, and we'll see where it leads. So I think that it would be best to leave it for the questions, because there are many aspects of this case, from the poisonings and assassinations themselves, ending with to the high politics of British-Russian relations and the response of the West, and to the propaganda aspect of it, because it's clearly a case of Russian effort to change public opinion, both in Russia, into the West, into the basic anti-American mode. Maybe Marina.
Very good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here with us. And I would like to tell why I decided to be involved in this case. Even I'm a North American citizen and I can't be under jurisdiction, it would be explained, but I can't be somewhere and to be relaxed when it's all happened. I can't be. Why? Almost 10 years, we tried to get justice for my husband. And I believed in 2006, when we provided public inquiry report, in 2016, I did all. I mean, we brought all information to public. It was a lot of evidence. It was a lot of statements of experts. It was absolutely clear who killed my husband. And it was not a closed material. And name of Lugovo and Kovtun was pointed during this public inquiry. It was saying more. It was very high probability Putin was behind of this crime. And it was could not be happened without knowledge of former director of FSB, Patrushev. I just tried to remind what we achieved in 2016. But in 2018, after Sergei Skripal and Yulia was attempting to poisoning, we started to receive all this propaganda-style program from Russia, who tried to destroy what we did for these 10 years, and when we believed, we proved who killed my husband. And now they try to use a case of Alexander Litvinenko to destroy a future case of Yulia and Sergei Skripal. Why we say it is not only personal case of Alexander Goldfarb, when he claimed he killed my husband, is an all Russian propaganda-style machine. And we try to stop it, or try to show people how is it dangerous. And taking this case to the court, I believe, is the most right things to do. because we don't have no other power to prevent Russia propaganda. But to take this case to the court, we might do something what we can. And I will support this case as much as I can, and I believe is the right things. And I'd like to take this attention, people, how important to fight against propaganda from Russian TV.
Andy, please.
Well, I'm just a lawyer, so I'm the least important person here, but I think Dr. Goldfarb is an American citizen. And just so it's clear, one of the things that I've learned is that there are hundreds of thousands of people in the United States speaking the Russian language, that the Russian language programs are available in cable television packages, and therefore Dr. Goldfarb has been the victim of, I think, the most heinous lies imaginable, that he killed his friend, that he killed his wife, that he was a member of the CIA, and there are, besides the inherent implausibility of those claims, we know that a very extensive inquiry was conducted by the High Court, I believe 36 days of testimony. And the conclusion was beyond a doubt that 2 former KGB agents were sent into England to kill Mr. Litvinenko, and that there was a high probability that Putin ordered that. So this is something that is happening in the United States on cable television programs that are available to hundreds of thousands of people here. And of course, this is a case that is about an individual American citizen who has been defamed, but I think we can see in this case some real echoes of what is going on generally with Russian propaganda that attempts to disrupt democracy not only in our country but all over the world.
Thank you. Alex and Marina, I'd like to first give you both an opportunity to respond to last week's statement by Theresa May identifying 2 GRU operatives as complicit in the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Marina, you've stated in many interviews that if Russia was not held accountable, if there was no conclusion or punishment for killing your husband, that this would happen again. And you boldly stated most recently, after the Skripal poisonings, that lessons were not being learned. Do you now feel that international attention is sufficiently focused on these state-sponsored assassins? It's to both of you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It was very difficult to bring this case to justice first. And of course, we knew we never would be able to bring people who committed this crime to justice. And Lugavoy and Kovtun, they are in Russia. And Russia never tried to extradite these people for justice to UK. And only way to bring this case for public eyes, I believed it was the most right things. And to bring this case to public eyes, I believe might prevent any such crime again. But when it happened in the last March in UK, I couldn't believe. I couldn't believe it's happened again, and another people now suffered and fighting for their life. But what surprised me is this reaction. It was reaction immediate. In 1 week, we heard UK blamed Russia of committed this crime. Theresa May named and asked immediately response from Russia. It was completely opposite for what happened in my case. And this time I said, okay, something was done, and now we have this reaction immediate. And not only from British government, we received a huge international support, what we didn't have 12 years ago. And it was expelled Russian diplomat from many countries, and it was all right steps. But we knew Russia never will be cooperate. And even you will find all evidence, even you asked to, again, extradite people who might committed this crime, Russia will never ever to do this. And what Theresa May says last week, it's exactly what I said before. It's going to be the same scenario of Litvinenko case. We will name suspects, we asked for extradition, but Russia never will do this. But I can't say it was a wrong step, because for all these months it was so much speculation, like we don't have not evidence, you don't have facts, and there need to be some movement from British government to say, yes, we have this full investigation, we have suspects, and even more, we saw images of these two men. And what I believe Russia is supposed to do, to say, no, we have these people, and they never came to UK, and they never committed, oh no, they might be came to UK, but they never committed this crime. But what we can see, we don't have any response from Russia's authorities, what exactly these people did or did not do. It's all covered again. And it would be a very difficult situation for Theresa May and for British government, how they will do next steps, because from my point of view, another public inquiry for Skripal case, it would be the right step, because as much information we know about this would be more helpful and I hope more possible to prevent such kind of crime again.
Well, Marina said it all. I might just add that Churchill once said that Americans would always do the right thing after they try everything else. So in this case, it can be reversed and directed to the British. The response was overwhelming. We only could have wished that it had happened 12 years ago, with, appeals to allies and with bringing it to the Security Council and so on. As opposed to the consistent resistance of Her Majesty's government to Litvinenko inquiry for 10 years. Marina had to sue Theresa May in order to have this inquiry, and it was the court decision to compel the government to hold it in 2016. But this is just the beginning. The major difference, or one of major differences between Skripal and Litvinenko, is that Novichok is a weapon of mass destruction, whereas polonium is not, by virtue of the fact that polonium has a short half-life, so it cannot be stockpiled. Novichok can be stockpiled, and nobody will ever notice this. So there is an additional national security argument to get to the bottom of these things and to see if it was one test tube or tens of or hundreds of tons of this Novichok, like it was with anthrax in the Soviet times. So the sanctions that were announced were in two tranches, and in November, at least the threat was to impose a much harsher sanctions on Russia if they do not comply with the provisions of international ban on chemical weapons, including on-site inspection. It's all, echoes of the Cold War. But if there will be, at least that's what everybody says, that if there is no on-site inspection, there will be more serious sanctions. And let's wait and see whether the West will back out of this or pursue what is. Of course, these sanctions will be very damaging, like a ban of Aeroflot flights to the United States.
Alex, people may have forgotten after several years' time who was Alexander Litvinenko as a person. You and Marina have both discussed in interview how his honor and his principles and his story sustain your efforts to seek justice. Can you tell us more about his convictions and his driving spirit?
Well, I met Sasha first in the late 90s in Moscow when I worked there for George Soros. And I witnessed his rebellion against his agency, that is the FSB, the security agency, on the subject of corruption and criminality. So he was a whistleblower, an honest cop who appealed to the public, essentially bringing attention to the wrong things which he believed is happening within the KGB. He was not political. It was not a political protest. It was an internal anti-corruption whistleblowing. And then and in the course of this thing, he met with Putin. He immediately, and Marina will mention this, he was immediately told that Putin is the wrong guy. And then he was arrested, he was briefly released and fled to UK. And his specialty was organized crime. He was never, a spy in the sense of working for the British under a cover. So he went to UK with our help, mine and Mr. Berezovsky. And in some while after that, he was recruited, I would say, by the British Secret Service as an outside consultant on Russian organized crime, and that's what probably brought him to this assassination, because at the time he was investigating for the British and the Spanish law enforcement the doings of Russian organized crime all over Europe, including Spain. And Spain, it appears now, is a particularly soft spot of Mr. Putin. So that's his bio in a short, in a few words. But he was a very honorable and honest guy with a lot of idealism, and that's an evolution of a very important conversion from, being part of the system to going against the system.
I think it's
Thank you. Yes. Randy, let's talk a little bit about the details of the legal claim. The Atlantic Council just did a recent report on pushing back against Russian propaganda. And one of the things that they said in the report, that it is often very difficult in the United States to bring a libel case. How strong do you think this legal claim is? What has been the response thus far from RT, and how solid a case do you think you have?
Well, I wouldn't sign the complaint unless I thought it had merit. Defamation is certainly a difficult cause of action, and I think it's pretty clear that for purposes of defamation law, Dr. Goldfarb will be what's called a limited purpose public figure. We have the First Amendment in the United States, which gives tremendous protection to journalists. When someone is a public figure, there's a very famous Supreme Court case, Sullivan, in which the Supreme Court said if someone is a public figure, you really have to not just say something that is false, but you have to, in effect, know that it's false. In this case, the broadcasters, we believe, were putting forth and endorsing the statements by Walter Litvinenko that the very extensive inquiry in the United Kingdom showed to be absurd. And it's important to note that Walter Litvinenko testified, and this alternative theory was rejected in the United Kingdom. I think there are cases that talk about a series of facts that are, in effect, preposterous, beyond belief. And I think when the whole picture is examined, including the extensive inquiry that in the United Kingdom, that the idea that Dr. Goldfarb somehow had access to polonium because he was a CIA agent is ludicrous on its face. So I think it's, I'm sure, the case was just filed a few days ago, on Friday. So we haven't heard yet from the defendants. My guess is that they are going to defend the case vigorously. We will see. But we're prepared to fight it out.
But walk us through a few scenarios. The scenario, they don't respond at all, they fight vigorously. What is your strategy for these various?
Well, I think for the reasons I mentioned before, the stations are subject to jurisdiction in the United States. They are selling their product in New York, among other places, and earning, I believe, millions of dollars. So I think they would be hard-pressed to default. There was a case in England where Channel One, in fact, did default, but I think they are much less of a presence there than they are here. So I think they will, I'm not counting on a default.
Marina, let's go back. What you and Alexander are doing is extremely dangerous. RT is a state-run media operation, and the legal claim is a bold shot at the Russian state. You achieved an amazing victory with your public inquiry. What compels you again to act so decisively in this case?
Before, when we received this old propaganda-style Russian program, we understand we can't do nothing. It's not happened just now. It started immediately after my husband's death. In 2006, in 2007, it was a lot of programs saying, completely lying about who Sasha was, for what Sasha did, what happened in UK. But we couldn't do nothing because we didn't have this investigation completed. We couldn't bring any official materials. And we couldn't even prove it was Russia state behind of this crime. And only what I saw, what is a huge machine of Russian propaganda push us. And I couldn't believe how much it cost to Russia state to fight against us without nothing. We didn't have nothing, only truth. But when we received this, what I said, public inquiry report, and when it was officially said, is a Russia state behind of this crime, and when these people was named, I realized I have power. And this power, because I received this all from legal case in my way for justice. And now when I can see how this propaganda machine tried to destroy it again, and I can't stay just and relax. And what another thing is very important, since I believe 2014, since invasion in Ukraine, public opinion about Kremlin regime became more serious. Before, it was very difficult to prove how is a dangerous situation because people still believe Russia is a democratic country. And when we're talking about journalism and a very safety material, because nobody wants to restrict to journalists what to say and how to say, and not to put this under control. But now, after 2014, and we see how Russia propaganda works, how they twist any information, and particularly channel as Russia Today, and who has all this broadcasting abroad. I mean, it's available not only for Russian-speaking people and for any languages, as English, German, French, and how people became confused. What is it true or what is not? Because they believe it is just alternative opinion. And of course, people in a democratic country is very happy to use alternative opinion, not only state channels. And we see how is it dangerous because it's not simple another opinion, it's a propaganda. And I'll give you one example, not connecting to my case, but example how this propaganda works. For example, in Germany, I can't say it's a statistic, but it was some kind of sociological issue. People watching Russian channel and being a German citizen, most likely to vote for Alternative for Germany. I mean,
which is the right wing.
It's a very, very right wing party in Germany. And I mean, from Russia's channel, they try to provide some kind of opinion, and just Russian people don't know one, they just started to think in opposite completely. And this is quite dangerous situation. And we're talking not only for Russian people in Russia, now we're even talking more for Russian people living in abroad, and not only Russian speaking and other languages. And this one, again, I'm not obligated to do this, but I feel I can't stay in a site.
One point that I think is interesting is that these channels claim to be independent journalists. If you go on their websites, they make a big deal about the fact that they are the equivalent of American networks. So I think they are, in a way, I think in a case like this, in something of a bind, because I think they would be hard-pressed to defend a case like this by saying, well, we're really just an arm of the Russian government. We're really the equivalent of Pravda or Izvestia, where there's some cases in the past where someone tried to sue Pravda or Izvestia in the United States, and they were able to defend on the basis of sovereign immunity. I think they are going to be very reluctant to make a statement that their entire way that they present themselves to the world is a sham.
Randy, I understand, though, the United States has pushed RT to claim that it's an arm of the Russian state in 2017.
Channel 1, which I think is the main defendant here, is has not been registered as an agent. But you're right.
Legally, I don't think being registered as the agent of the Russian state makes you a part of the Russian state. Right. Like half a dozen of lobbying firms in this city are registered as agents of the Russian state, but it doesn't make them sovereign bodies.
Right.
With regard to your question of security,
yes.
Well, to begin with, there are people who put themselves more in danger in Russia, who are demonstrating on the street as we speak there. So I feel relatively safe here, but who knows? But I should admit that I have a personal motivation here. They have, and this kind of, it's not purely political or values or ideological, it's a matter of me personally against this whole, I would use the Reaganite term, forces of evil. Because my close friend was murdered in a most horrible way and died in front of my eyes. And regardless of whether it's helpful or harmful for the international aspects of it, I think that the murderers should be punished in some way. And there is no way to do it individually, because they will never stand trial for murder. But when now they, claim that on top of this all, I was the one who killed him, it adds insult to injury, and this is a major motivation for me to fight back. And having said that, I realize very well that it has implications and impact on how the Russian propaganda machine tries to subvert Western democracies, and it's an important case.
Thank you, Alex. So you talked a little bit about your personal stake in this claim, and you talked a little bit about pushing back against the Russian propaganda regime. But you're an American. What impact are you hoping to achieve with the American government in public with your legal claim? Is this purely a legal claim on personal defamation you suffered, or do you wish to see this legal action catalyze further political?
Well, clearly this, in addition to being a pure defamation case, it's a case of a public interest on many levels. It raises awareness to propaganda, to weapons of mass destruction, to policy issues, and I obviously am happy that it would contribute to the debate and show what's going on with Russia and Russian propaganda. So, in addition to that, there are other aspects of this whole story. And I probably should use this opportunity to say that one of the messages that we try to put across when we meet with people on the Hill or in the government is that we strongly support recent legislation by Senator Menendez and Senator Graham to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. It's long overdue. And there are very serious legal grounds for doing that. And secondly, we would like to see the executives and key players of the Russian propaganda machine, such as the CEOs of Channel One Russia and Russia Today, on the American sanctions list, because the thrust, the narrative is not that Alex Goldfarb killed Litvinenko. The narrative is that the Americans, the CIA, killed Litvinenko using Alex Goldfarb. So it's clearly a case that should be of interest to the policymakers.
Randy, you've talked about how you expect a robust response. That's your expectation. Can you lay out for us sort of the case? What is going to be your response? How are you going to push back? What are the legal?
Well, we did write letters, and one of the main response was that we were just broadcasting Walter's opinion. So I think it is true that opinions generally are not actionable, but I think our response to that will be that when you look, and by the way, the station had no responsibility. When you look at these programs, it is quite clear, and I think they're all on. Are they all on your website? Or they're quite remarkable, and they're very slick in the packaging. So this is not a situation where someone comes on a program and just blurts something out. This was a highly orchestrated, planned attack where the stations, I think, are clearly giving Walter a platform because they are basically giving his views their imprimatur. And it's one of the things that I enjoyed was when Walter mentioned Dr. Goldfarb's name on one of the programs, all of a sudden a picture appears with the evil Goldfarb with the equally evil Andrei Sakharov. And one of the things that Dr. Goldfarb hasn't said is that in his one aspect of his very distinguished career was that he was working closely with Sakharov. By the way, it's amusing because one of the things that they say, how did Goldfarb get access to polonium? Well, see, he was a pal of Sakharov, so he knows all about that stuff. So I think that based on the way they responded to our letters before we sued, I think they'll just say, oh, we were just broadcasting someone's opinion, but I think we'll take them on that one.
And Randy, you know, often with the legal strategy, there can be a political element to that strategy as well. For example, any discovery process could yield invaluable information on RT. A prolonged legal process could be costly and complicate RT's operation in the United States. Do you have a political angle to your legal case?
Well, I think it's obvious from what Dr. Goldfarb and Marina have said that the case has political aspects that are important. On the other hand, at least as I view it as a lawyer, this is primarily a case about the vindication of the rights of one American citizen who has been grievously injured by people bringing this disinformation, these lies into our country. So, you know, we'll see where it goes. The scope of discovery will really depend on how they choose to defend the case. But to say there's not a political aspect of it would be silly, especially since our client has just said that there is a political aspect to it. But look, I think it's very important that this is, I think, an exemplar of what's going on in many different circumstances all over the world that the Russians are doing to subvert democracy, to subvert the Western alliance, And so we will prosecute the case for our client, and what comes out of it comes out of it.
With regard to the cost that you mentioned, at this point I'm more worried about costs to me than to RT and Channel 1, who have much more money than I do. And I think one of the possible strategies would be to exhaust us and, and to make sure that at some point we'll simply run out of money. But I should say that this case has so far been supported by quite efficient crowdfunding campaign. We're raising money from the public, and the response was very good, mostly from the Russian expat community. But there are people who are interested in investing in this important case, and this in turn gives us the feeling that it's not only important for us, but for many people out there.
Yeah. Can you just it was kind of tragic seeing Walter Litvinenko up on the screen there. Can you tell me sort of what pressures he's under to be giving testimony like this, or?
Well, Walter Litvinenko, there is a whole culture of people signing Faustian deals with the side of evil. I'm sorry, I'm not this type, but I always bring about these dramatic characterizations. So Walter was indeed in very dire circumstances in 2012 in Italy. He was recovering from the death of his wife. He didn't have enough money because the business of his son went bankrupt. And he asked Berezovsky for support and received some, but then he asked for more. And at the time, Mr. Berezovsky was himself in big financial trouble. We all know how it ended. So he essentially was sitting there in dire situation, and apparently he made a conscious decision. The time difference between his last anti-Putin statement and his plea to Putin to forgive him was 5 days. He switched around in 5 days. Apparently it was and he's quite, fit guy. He's not really a nutcase. So once you step down this happened with many people I know. Once you step down this line, there is no way back, because you'll always be considered as a bad person by your former crowd, and your new crowd will demand more and more and more. So that's a classical, if you want, Shakespearean tragedy of one man. And that's all I can say.
Unfortunately, we have this old history of KGB tricks when they use relatives against each other, when they could bring ex-wives to say something against people who became or dissident or became critics of regime, and it's still the same, and nothing changed. And I can't say I can't protect Walter, because for what he did, and he can't be forgiven. But he was used, and maybe he was not pressed very hard, but he was definitely used.
You all have talked a little bit about the timing of this case, that there are also investigations going on in the United Kingdom right now of RT. Following the Salisbury poisoning, the Shadow Chancellor, John MacDonald, said it was no longer appropriate for Labour MPs to appear on RT, given that they could not report the news impartially. In March, the UK Regulatory Commission, Ofcom, has said that it would launch an investigation, and based on the results, pull RT's license if it found that Russia unlawfully used force against the UK in the Scrabble case, which has been proven. So Marina, what measures do you expect the UK government to take against RT in the next few weeks?
No, we were waiting for decisions this Ofcom committee, and it's really serious. And because it's not only one complaint, it's complaint of different people and not maybe many of them. And UK can't just ignore it. And we will wait. And I was already used to wait, and I hope not for 10 years, but I believe it would be decision-taking, because what I said already, climate has changed.
And so you're expecting a rather robust response?
Yes, yes. And
including possibly the pulling of the license?
We will see. It depends for how hard English government, UK government will decide to do this. But for all last actions, I can see British government is very serious. I mean, it's not protecting any more dirty money using in UK, and it's a lot of investment visas from Russia might be cancelled. It's a very serious process.
And how much does this help your case if things proceed in the UK? And
you know, at the end of the day, I'm not quite sure it's all that relevant. It really. The question will be, did they knowingly make false statements about Dr. Goldfarb that caused him damage? And perhaps, I really haven't thought about it, that would be some additional evidence from which an inference could be drawn that they have a pattern of acting with reckless disregard of the truth. But my sense is our rules of evidence are what happened in our case. And I think what happened in our case, we have a lot of excellent evidence.
So after the events of last week, I'd like you all's opinion. Is Russia a rogue state? Does it violate international law? And
you mean other than their invasion of the Ukraine and?
Well, it's all the matter, in my view, it's a matter of definition. If those who make decision would decide to designate Russia as a rogue state, and it's political. There's certainly grounds to designate Russia as a rogue state, and there are certainly arguments for not doing that, probably. What's more important to me is not definitions, but clearly an atmosphere of change we witness in the past couple of years, essentially, with regard to Russia. And this is the change from the policy of engagement, which we've seen in, in the 2 decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union, to the policy of containment. And this is very reminiscent of what happened in the 40s, when big friendship between the United States and alliance and the Soviet Union abruptly changed to the policy of containment, when the policymakers here realized that it is a threat, not just a suppressor of human rights or a regional a regional troublemaker, but it's an existential threat to the security of the United States. And it appears, and the UK, of course, and it appears that this massive use of disinformation and propaganda and hacking and whatnot constitutes an offensive operation which aims to undermine the Western democracies. And this looks like they realize that they have crossed the red line from being, bad but not very dangerous or weak country somewhere halfway around the world to a serious threat, as it is. Yeah.
Immediate threat. Good. I would love to turn the session over to the audience. Why don't I gather 3 questions, and we have mics back here. Can I take the 2 of you here, and then I have a hand back there. I'll get you next.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Gerben. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. And I have a question for the counselor. Is the case being brought in federal court or in a state? And secondly, since RT broadcasts in English, isn't the potential damage much greater than the 100,000 Russian speakers in the United States?
All right.
Elaine Sereo, Associate Rector of UACU WIUU in Kiev, Ukraine. And Ms. Litvinchenko, first of all, thank you very much for your perseverance. This is not an easy task. And you have been persevering, and this is the results that you get from your perseverance. It will be ongoing. To the attorney, Mr. Stelinka, what is the time frame? Do you have any projections? These things do have a tendency. The wheels of law grind very, very slowly, and there'll be a lot of obstacles put in your way. And then to Dr. Goldfarb, do you have any concerns for your personal safety, sir?
And one more. And please, you know what? Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
My name is Puriya Ahanza, and I'm an exchange student from Germany. And my question into the panel would be in how far you see similarities or differences in the way the various varieties of Russia Today argument in each country. Thanks.
So, Randy?
So the easy question is, the time frame of a lawsuit is always somewhat difficult to predict, but despite what people think, in the Southern District of New York, one of the reasons we're happy to be in federal court is that the judges there control things pretty strictly and set a schedule and are really on top of what's going on. It's interesting. Our case was assigned to a judge, Judge Sullivan, who's a great judge. Unfortunately for us, he has been nominated for the Second Circuit, the Court of Appeals, and I think from what I gather, he's not going to run into any opposition. I think Senator Schumer was instrumental in his appointment, so we're probably going to have a different judge. But I have a lot of confidence that the federal courts are very good these days in keeping things under control and really from stopping a party who attempts to bury the other side in extraneous discovery requests, et cetera, et cetera.
What was the question?
Your personal
safety. Well, as I said, I feel pretty safe. Maybe it's a false sense of security. I feel much safer here than in Europe, for example, and certainly safer than in Eastern Europe. But And I hope to think that Putin won't do to Trump what he did to Theresa May, and that American citizenship still protects. But who knows? I had a visit from the FBI after this all happened. They showed up and said, "Have you noticed something unusual, some new people?" And I said, "No." They said, "Okay, here's our card. If something, call us." I don't know. With regard to English language impact, I think it's an important question. Yes, Russia today broadcasts not to tens of thousands, but to millions of people, both in UK and around the world. I don't know around the world, but I can sense that in UK and in the United States, there is a large, believe me, there is a large army of people who are responsive to this kind of things, either as doubters of the American system or American government, or conspiracy theorists who think that all the press in the United States is fake news and you need to get alternative point of view and so on. So it is, we can see it every day in social media comments and so on. So it is serious, I think. It's not only our case, but many other stories there. But it is a classic case of fake news, and we feel actually fortunate that we could put this on the platform of legal inquiry and show them for what they are.
We had a question about the similarities and differences
between another countries, maybe Marina.
No, I would say we already have two examples. What happened here in the United States, we have a claim against these two channels, and we have in UK this Ofcom committee, and it depends of people in what each country they do live and how they do react to channel Russia Today and what they want for this country. Are they agree for this kind of propaganda, or they want to fight against this propaganda? And what I believe in the Baltic country, there's some restrictions against Sputnik and Russia Today, because it's very damaging. And how do you know Baltic country very, very concerned for similarity what might happen in Ukraine? And they every time feel this aggression from Russia, and of course a huge population of Russian-speaking people, and in Estonia, in Latvia, and Lithuania, they are all time worried what kind of information this Russian community received from Russia. But it all depends from local and from people living in these countries.
So I have two questions here, and I'll take the third here. Can we have a microphone? You're hiding with me. Okay. I think the rest of the audience would like to.
Thank you for taking the question. My name's J.J. Green. I'm the national security correspondent at WTOP and the host of the Target USA podcast. I'd like to ask Mrs. Litvinenko and Dr. Goldfarb a question. Mrs. Litvinenko, you've come here. This is a very high-profile case and situation, something I and others have followed for the decade that it's been out there. What is it that you want to leave with this audience today? What is it that you want this audience to do? And Dr. Goldfarb, you've talked about your personal safety before, and you've sort of downplayed your concerns. But considering what they're capable of and what they've executed or shown that they can do, are you trying to simply just make this not about panic? Is there a real danger? Thank you.
There's a gentleman back here in the blue, yeah.
Thank you, Tim Nelson. I wonder, since the Magnitsky Act became so prominent as a tool for holding human rights offenders around the world accountable, would you imagine a possible Litvinenko Act that might sanction propagandists or perhaps prevent Western advertisers from being the primary funders of Russian propaganda, or sanction Russia for targeted assassinations of Russians abroad, or encourage the U.S. to not allow the anonymity of companies to hide Russian money laundering into the U.S. and UK as one of the primary destinations for the kleptocracy.
Great question. You both have asked several questions. I'll take this round and then I'll get back to you. So, Marina, what would you want this audience to do?
First of all, I do understand not everything is easy to achieve. And after this long way for justice, I realized you need to be patient, you have to wait, and one day it will happen. Not without help, of course, and not without understanding from people. When we came 2 years ago to Washington to meet people and discuss what we can do with this public inquiry report, because it was real stuff, and we received a lot of support, but people being a little bit how to say, not reserved in what they can do for us. And we discussed about Russia Today channel, and we said at least you can call this foreign agent. But then 2 years ago it was saying it might be difficult because again we have this freedom of speech, independency of journalists. But what happened? Russia Today is foreign agent. And sometimes it's difficult to prove immediately what right things to do. And again, I do understand you are in a very serious legal position, and I adopt democracy of my country, United Kingdom, and I'm very proud of this country as well. And I believe you would be strong enough to protect your democracy and your legal rights and everything. What actually we now try to find for is not only for Russia and for your country too, to prevent something you never know might be destroyed simply by propaganda. So,
yeah, I second Marina, and what I think the take-home lesson is that Russia is not just simply bad actor somewhere, but it's a direct and serious threat when you take all together the murders, the propaganda, the nature of the weapons they use, and so on. So it is a threat, and it should be dealt with as an immediate threat. Now, JJ's question about my personal safety, what can I say? I feel pretty safe. I don't think about it. But, you know, if you ask this question to somebody who is really in danger, like a military guy or, a firefighter or, a cop, they are in danger and they learn to live with it and kind of disregard it, discount it.
I will tell you something that happens to be true. I spoke with a very good friend of mine who is a lawyer who worked in Russia for many years and is now back in New York. And I asked him if he wanted to work with me on this case. And he said, that sounds great, fascinating, Goldfarb's a good guy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He called me back a few days later and said, I've thought about it. I still do business in Russia from time to time. I want to preserve my ability to go to Russia, so I'm going to decline, which I have to say I was shocked when he told me that, but upon reflection, I understand. And indeed, I canceled my summer vacation in Russia. No, I'm kidding.
About the Litvinenko, A very important question. I don't want it to slip away. About, thank you, Tim, about the Litvinenko Act. Well, the legacy of Sasha Litvinenko are two ways. One is, as you've mentioned, it should be the some sort of a mechanism countering hostile propaganda. But in order to bring it to the level of act, legal act, we probably need to win the case first. So before we do this, it probably would not be a viable proposal. But the other half of your reasoning, and that is the legacy of Sasha Litvinenko as one of the first people who tried to expose the kleptocracy, the corruption component of Russian regime. This is what is different between the current regime and the old Soviet regime. There is a lot of personal corruption. So he was the one who, once he came to the West, tried to explain to everybody that what's wrong about the situation there is not that they suppress media or that they do something with the parliament or the elections. It's all means to an end. Their major motivation is money and the ability to pillage the country and pocket this money and store them outside of Russia. So some sort of a serious and there are things that's happening, serious legislative efforts to to make sure that this illicit money cannot hide behind anonymous LLPs, or that beneficial owners of luxurious apartments in Miami or in Manhattan should be disclosed, especially, and the real estate and lawyers should be held liable if they help cover it up. And this easily comes out of the existing legislation on countering corruption. This is long overdue, and I think we'll be very honored if Litvinenko's name were put on this.
Sir, you've been very patient.
My question is
your mic is coming.
As a teacher, I also thought, don't need a mic. My question is somewhat rhetorical. We know that Sputnik and Russia today are indistinguishable from the Kremlin, and they know it, and we know it. And I've often wondered why we meaning like the American government, for example, does not take a more proactive approach to sanction them. To me, it's a little strange. Look, we live and work in Ukraine, and same situation. You have most of the major TV stations owned by people like Viktor Medvedchuk, who's unabashedly Putin's main man in Ukraine, and the stations put out, on purpose crazy conspiracy theories, muddy the water, undermine the government, make truth not just relative but impossible to grasp. And the Ukrainian government doesn't do anything to sanction them. We sanction Russian metallurgical companies, we sanction Russian banks, but for some reason we don't sanction what we all know, including many governments, European governments, British, American. We don't sanction what we know are direct assaults on our entire concept of rule and law and truth. And it's a bit of a rhetorical. Maybe you might shed some light on that. But I've never understood. We sanction an aluminum company. We don't touch Russia today. I don't get it.
You already mentioned it's a very sensitive subject of freedom of speech. It's exactly what Russia today every time saying. If you touch us, we're going to close others' channels in Russia, because we are saying truth. And exactly what we try to say, they every time play with all this opinion and what does it mean democracy, what is a real democracy, what does it mean justice, what is real justice. It's all time this game in Russia. when you try to prove something, they say, no, what are you doing is not right. We're going to do all the same. And actually, I would like to mention something, if it's going to be all right and correct about this claim. And all Russian oligarchs, but most of them, like London as a place to bring claim in a court. It means if it's happened, the accepted decision of British court, it means it would be very important if this case would happen in an American court, and we will see how they will accept this or not. But it was always all time, any cases, or these commercial cases, or these divorces.
Their course of action.
Exactly, they all bring this in a court in UK because they trust this court. They can't do this in Russia because they don't trust Russian courts. Yes, we'll see reaction of this.
Any other questions? Sir, and then Viola.
Thank you. Alexander Naumov from George Mason University. Dr. Goldfarb, you mentioned that this was the act of a bad actor. But do you believe that these assassinations reflect the marks of a rational actor? What do you think the aims of them were? And do you think that overall they were a success or a failure, given the reaction that it provoked in the British government, in the West, in the Russian expat community as well? Do you think they got what they wanted, whoever did it, and was it rational?
There are two schools of thought. A friend of mine who lives in Washington, who is an ex-Russian KGB intelligence officer, told me, don't try to explain Putin's actions by rational means. He is mad, and you can't explain the actions of a madman by rational explanations. And I don't agree with that, but there is a school of thought. Like, I think that there is a rational reason for both Litvinenko and Skripal poisonings, particularly at that time, and particularly these specific targets. It's not a random target. We don't know. We didn't know what is the reason for Sasha Litvinenko's murder, and we still don't know until today, because there are at least several theories why this happened. But my favorite theory, for example, is his role in investigating Putin's links with organized crime in Spain. This is what he did in the last 2 years of his life, and it was a very serious investigation, which resulted in indictment of several mafia figures and exposure of their links with the highest levels at the Kremlin. And we know, again, for a fact that Sasha Litvinenko was very helpful, particularly in this aspect of it, figuring out who at the top of Russian government is linked to these mobsters. Having said that, I didn't mean to say that they are linked to them now, because mobsters operate at a much lower level than heads of government. But those links date back to the period in St. Petersburg, where Putin was a humble official in the city hall, and the mafia owns the city, and there are documented links between them. So there might be some old dirty secret of Putin, which was so important for Putin that they did it with Sasha Litvinenko. To the same extent, I think there must be a reason behind Skripal attack, and we don't know about it. But I hope we will once the full inquiry happens, and the British will tell us what it is. But my argument is that it's very specific and rational and well organized, and maybe poorly organized, but well motivated crimes.
Viola.
Thank you. Viola Ganger with Just Security, a blog at New York University School of Law, Center for Law and Security. We often hear two messages coming from the U.S. government about Russia and the Kremlin, one being the relatively positive rhetoric out of the White House, the other being some of the specific, quite strong policies, such as the sanctions, repeated sanctions in recent years, as well as the Secretary of State Pompeo's statement on Crimea, never recognizing Russian annexation. Which of those two messages do you feel is coming through most strongly right now?
I think both of them are very well, and they reinforce each other, because it's not just a matter of, foreign policy, which is not a major issue in any case, but it's part of the American political debate, and I will not go into this. Everybody knows what's going on with all these Russia aspects of Trump presidency. And the messages both are coming across very strongly. And the question is how they are perceived in Moscow, which is more important. What do they see in all of that? But they know much more than we do. And I will quote Ambassador Daniel Fried, who I think said in this room once, "We don't know how Kremlin works, so we don't know how our sanctions are perceived there. But we didn't know anything about them during the Cold War, but we won. So maybe we'll win that time without knowing what's going on."
We have time for two more questions, and then here, and then the gentleman here.
Is it working? Professor, of all the people that the Kremlin could have tried to pin this murder on, why you? You just don't look like the type to me. Why did they decide they're going to try to pin the murder of this man on you? And then the second question I have is, do you know why the victim's father turned on his own daughter-in-law and, of course, you as well? What caused him to turn? And, that almost silly clip from the television show where he looks like he's half out of his mind, accusing you of not just his son's murder, but you killed your own wife. How did that happen?
Okay. Shall I answer?
Go ahead, and then, sir, we'll take your question.
What was the first question?
So the first question is, why you?
Why me? Well, that's very simple. The major purpose of this exercise is for the accused perpetrator is to fit the narrative of Russia being under attack by America and specifically the American intelligence services. This is the major theme, which is of Russian message to their own people and to their fans around the world. The evil is actually here. So it's obviously by default I'm an American, and I am the only American who was on the scene, whose picture, maybe there were more, but I don't know about them. Their pictures are not available. So from the standpoint of a professional PR, I'm a natural choice. That's number one. Number two is that they have a long-standing grudge against me, I presume, because starting from the fact that I helped them to get into UK 18 years ago. So that's number one. Number two was
The father.
Oh, the father, well, we've already discussed it. This is a sad case when the whole, where, as I said, it started with Litvinenko Sr. wanting to return back to Moscow. He was penniless at the time, and he didn't have Moscow residence permits to begin with. In 2 years, he got back in Moscow. He was installed in the good apartment. According to another participant of this whole program, and that is the niece of Sergei Skripal, she's being paid a hefty amount of money, like a lot of money, for participating in this program, so you can assume that Walter is being paid too. And so it's a clear economic and advantage to him, especially in his old age. That's number one. Number two, as I said, it's very difficult to turn back once you start going down this line. He wanted, to say that my son was a traitor, let me back to Moscow. And 3 years later, he went out accusing me of killing my wife, although he knew perfectly well that my wife died of cancer 5 years after he claimed she died, and that she couldn't address him in English because she was a Russian. He didn't speak English, so it's all totally unbelievable story. But who cares?
Sir, you'll have the last question.
Kovalenko Victor, Ukrainian Legal Group. So first comment, I just went through American mass media about Russia Today. So the audience of Russia Today is American, is around 8 million people, and probably more, because under the First Amendment, major American channels, they have to allocate time for smaller companies for free. And Russia Today is using this free time to broadcast. Second, a lot of Americans doesn't know that they're watching de facto Russian state-owned company. They think they changed the name from Russia Today to RT, and a lot of Americans are thinking that they're watching American broadcasting company. And as to the Walter Litvinenko, this is strange to Americans, but this is nothing strange for, let's say, post-Soviet people. We have plenty of cases like this. And now, for example, Ukrainian film producer and film director Oleg Sentsov is imprisoned in Russia, and the entire family refused from him. The entire family told that he is terrorist, that he wanted to undermine bridge. They do not want to meet him. They're not selling him money or parcels to prison. They closed him, except for his sister-in-law. Only she, let's say, visited him. Same story happened on TV with Russian soldiers, with fathers of Russian soldiers who was killed in Donbass. Initially, they told that they were desperate, that they will claim Russian government about this and ask Russian government. In few days, they changed their mind, told that everything is okay, that they are very happy, no claims, no questions about this. As to my question to Mr. Goldfarb, is as a friend of Boris Berezovsky, Putin told that Berezovsky sent him 2 letters begging pardon, telling that he would like to come back to Russia, etc., before his death. Do you believe in this? Do you know about these letters, whether he sent these letters to Putin or not?
I haven't seen those letters, but I believe this is true. Many people whom I know saw them, several people, I would say. So yes, Berezovsky was desperate at the end of his life. He was depressed. He was soul-searching. He thought that he lost his crusade against Putin. So it makes reasonable, and the fact is that people, at least 3 people told me they read the letters.
can I just say something in the context for what you just explained about Oleg Sentsov, about Donbass, about all information in Russia today? Yes, you're absolutely right. But we're talking about already a verdict of public inquiry report, what was not mentioned during this program. They pretend to broadcast saying Alexander Goldfarb poisoned my husband without even mention. It was already proof it was other two men who killed my husband. And it is some kind of a little bit different angle why we decide to go to action now, because we have this background. We had very similar programs before public inquiry, and we couldn't go because it was opinion, it was different opinion. But after we have this legal action and when we have this public inquiry report, we have this all right to take these people to the court.
I want to thank all of you. This was a great session. Thank you for the great questions. And I hope you will join me in thanking our panelists. Marina, for your persistence over years. And Alex, I think what you're hearing for the risks that you're taking. And Randy, we wish you all the success with the case. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.